Ludwig Wittgenstein set out to solve philosophy by drawing an absolute limit around what human language could meaningfully say. He wanted to impose the rigid structural order of a mathematical grid onto a world that refused to stay still. He was born in 1889 into the industrial elite of Vienna. His father was a steel tycoon, placing the Wittgensteins among the wealthiest and most culturally dominant families in the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Yet inside their palace, the family faced severe psychological turmoil. 3 of Ludwig's brothers would eventually take their own lives. This environment produced an intense moral sensitivity. Wittgenstein developed a drive for absolute clarity, leading him to reject his high society inheritance for a life of intellectual rigor. He sought a more stable certainty in the hard sciences, moving to England in 1908 to study aeronautical engineering at Manchester University. His research into propeller design required mastery of complex mathematical equations. This pushed his interest past physical machines and toward the pure logic that allowed those machines to be designed in the first place. Seeking the foundations of mathematics led him to Gottlob Frege, who recognized the young engineer's aptitude and suggested he study at Cambridge. Wittgenstein approached the abstract problems of thought with the mindset of an engineer. He looked for a perfect underlying structure, dismissing anything that could not be calculated with mathematical precision. In 1911, he arrived at Cambridge to study the foundations of logic under Bertrand Russell. Russell described his new student as perverse and obstinate, yet admitted the young man's philosophical sensitivity was acute. Within a year, Russell felt Wittgenstein was the only person capable of solving the logical problems that he himself was now too old to handle. Wittgenstein sought total focus through isolation. He spent months alone in a remote cabin on a Norwegian fjord, attempting to strip logic down to its core. This isolation was shattered by the outbreak of World War I. Wittgenstein volunteered for the Austro-Hungarian army, trading his desk for the front lines. He served as an artillery officer, eventually commanding heavy guns during the brutal fighting on the Eastern Front. While serving, he underwent a spiritual awakening, finding a copy of Tolstoy's Gospel in Brief and carrying it with him constantly as he faced the daily reality of death. In the trenches, he kept meticulous notebooks. Between artillery barrages, he drafted the numbered crystalline propositions of his first masterwork, the Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus. The Tractatus arrived not as a typical academic book, but as a rigid system designed to end all philosophical ambiguity through the sheer force of logic. The foundational axiom of the Tractatus is that the world is the totality of facts, not of things. It is defined by how objects are arranged, not by the objects themselves. This is his picture theory. A proposition has sense only if it mirrors a physical reality. He called this pictorial form, where language maintains the exact logical structure of facts. This is logical atomism. Every complex statement must reduce to these elementary propositions. This theory had a drastic consequence. Statements about ethics, aesthetics, or religion do not correspond to physical arrangements of objects. They cannot be logically pictured. Because these higher concepts lack logical form, Wittgenstein declared them meaningless to talk about. He ended the book with an admonition: what we cannot speak about, we must pass over in silence. He compared the Tractatus to a ladder. It was a tool to help the reader climb out of confusion, but once they understood the limits of language, the ladder had to be thrown away. Believing he had solved all philosophical problems, Wittgenstein left academia to work as a village schoolteacher. It was only in 1929 that he returned to Cambridge to resume his work. The primary disruptor to his new life was Piero Sraffa, an Italian Marxist economist who had moved to Cambridge to escape fascist persecution. Sraffa was a close friend of Antonio Gramsci. He viewed the world through the lens of material conditions and social relations, rather than abstract logical structures. During a conversation, Sraffa made a Neapolitan gesture of skepticism, brushing his fingertips under his chin. He asked Wittgenstein, "What is the logical form of this?" The grid of the Tractatus failed. The gesture clearly carried meaning, yet it didn't picture a state of affairs. Its sense came entirely from a shared social context. Sraffa's critique forced Wittgenstein to rethink his entire framework. He began to see that his early theory was blind to the way human beings actually interact. In his later work, The Philosophical Investigations, Wittgenstein treats language as a tool rather than a mirror. He argues that the meaning of a word is defined by its use within a community. He calls these language games. Just as a move in chess only makes sense within the rules of the game, a word only has meaning within a specific social activity. This led to his rejection of private meaning. If language is a game with rules, there must be a public way to tell if those rules are being followed. A private language known only to one person is impossible, because that person would have no way to distinguish between actually following a rule and merely thinking they were. We are initiated into language not by learning definitions, but by participating in the communal actions of human life. Despite the change in his methods, Wittgenstein's goal remained the same. He refused to build a new philosophical doctrine or a grand system of theories. He saw philosophy as a therapeutic activity. Its only job was to dissolve the knots in our thinking, caused by misunderstandings of our own language. This put him at odds with the logical positivists of the Vienna Circle, who had celebrated the Tractatus as a scientific manifesto for destroying metaphysics. The Vienna Circle used his logic as a weapon against the unsayable, while Wittgenstein himself held the unsayable in the highest regard. He didn't want to eliminate ethics and aesthetics. He wanted to protect them from being distorted by logical analysis. Philosophy for Wittgenstein was not about discovering new facts. It was about showing the fly the way out of the fly bottle, freeing us from the bewitchment of our own intelligence. His work at Cambridge led directly to the ordinary language philosophy movement, which shifted the focus of analytic philosophy toward how we use words in everyday life. His influence reached into modern cognitive science through prototype theory. Researchers found that we don't categorize things using a logical checklist of traits. Instead, we categorize them by their resemblance to central prototypes, exactly as Wittgenstein's family resemblance model suggested. This changed how we understand human memory and learning, moving away from a computer-like model of logic and toward an understanding of embodied social practice. Wittgenstein's trajectory took him from the cockpit of an aircraft, seeking a crystalline mathematical perfection, to the observations of a primary school teacher, watching the organic way children learn to speak. He passed away in 1951, having moved analytic philosophy away from the abstract structures of logic and toward the study of human activity. He left a legacy that redefined the limits of our world, showing that they are found not in the geometry of a grid, but in the living games we play with one another.